Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another URISA webinar. URISA is a professional organization for GIS folks that really works to try to connect folks across different areas and provide education, training, and resources across the spectrum of GIS, no matter where you're at in your GIS career. One of the ways that we do this is if you are a URISA member, we have our Connect platform, which is an online community which allows us to connect and stay connected across different topical groups, regional chapters, and URISA overall. I wanted to let you know about a few upcoming URISA programs. We do have several GIS Leadership Academies scheduled, one later this year in Denver, and the calendar for 2024 is already filling up. We're already really excited about the brand new advanced GIS Leadership Academy to be held in Chicago, only 11 months away for the advanced GLA. We'll be gathering in Columbus, Ohio next month for GIS Pro, and there's a lot of content related to addressing and next generation 911. And that really leads us up to what we do in February with our location, enterprise addressing, and public safety virtual conference. We're working on the program for that now and hope to have the registration for that out after GIS Pro this year. There's almost always a webinar or panel or other virtual education piece scheduled. And if you visit the URISA website or the bit.ly/URISA Ed, you can see what's coming up, what's going on, what you can join or connect to. And so we have started a URISA book club. September 29th, the book that will be discussed is the most recent version, third edition of Mark Mamagne's How to Lie with Maps, always a classic. And then after GIS Pro, we'll have a webinar on the census content that's available in ArcGIS Living Atlas. So for today's activity, I think I got ahead of myself a bit. So one of the things that we try to do with URISA is see where our members are, where our volunteers are, where our chapters are, where our work groups are, where our task forces are, where our committees are, and seeing what the passion for GIS is and the experiences that can be shared. Because with an organization that's focused on education and training and resources and connecting and support, the material really comes from us and what we're interested in and what we're passionate about in our experiences. So as you're sitting through the session today and asking questions or reflecting on other questions you have, we'd like you to think about what's your GIS passion? What GIS experience do you have to share? And if that's related to next generation 911 or if that's related to something completely different, if any bells go off, please reach out to us, because the content that we provide through webinars and panel discussions and fact sheets and workshops and podcasts, really comes from us, the community, and helping each other out. All right, so for today's session, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Hillary Palmer.
Thank you, Matt. And I just want to echo what Matt shared about how URISA is a wonderful community for getting involved and for finding peers who probably share your struggles, and we can learn from each other and kind of move our careers along together and our profession along together. So please join us. Today's webinar is focusing on next generation 911 and the GIS that is so critical to it. We've assembled for you today a panel of our subject matter experts. So we have some topics that we thought, let's introduce our panel. Good call, Matt. So we have with us today Jeff Ledbetter. Jeff, can you wave? Jeff has his GISP and his ENP, Emergency Number Professional. He's a Senior Client Success Manager with Datamark or Michael Baker International. We also have with us Melissa Liebert. Melissa, hi. She is a Technical Program Manager, Next Gen Location Services for ComTech Telecommunications Services. We have Deb Rozeboom. Hi, Deb. Deb has her PMP, that's a project management professional. She also has her ENP and a GISP. She's a product manager for public safety GIS services for GeoComm. And we have Matt Gerike. Matt has his PhD and his GISP. He's a geospatial program manager for the Virginia Geographic Information Network and an avid volunteer within URISA. We thank him for his time. And I'm here moderating today, and I'm Hillary Palmer. I'm a project manager for Dewberry. We thank you all for joining us today and for registering and for sharing a little bit of your Friday with us. So if we move to the next slide, I believe we have just kind of a blank. Did you come with any questions for us? Did you come with any challenges that you're experiencing? It's kind of an open forum here, so we will leave it up to you all to come off mute, or should I call on them one at a time? What do you think? Do our attendees have the ability to raise their hands? I guess I should ask. I'm coming from a Teams environment, so Zoom is a little bit foreign.
I think probably the best way is if folks have a question, you can put it in the chat, or there's a Q&A tab.
There we go.
And as we're waiting for questions to come roiling in, what's really great about this panel is that I think everybody here has had their hands and feet and probably up to here or beyond in numerous next generation 911 GIS experiences and deployments across numerous agencies. And so I'm really looking forward to see what we can come up with just based on our experiences of what we run into. But maybe as we're waiting for questions to come in, I kind of wonder, fellow panelists, what's your current feeling about where the United States is as a country in moving to next generation 911 GIS? Are we kind of over the tipping point where we think everybody's moving towards it, or do we still think that we have some early adopters and we're still kind of waiting for other folks to really understand what it's about and start working on it? What's your feeling of where we're at?
Deb, you want to go first?
Sure. I would say that at least in my opinion, the progression of next gen across the country is kind of similar to the progression of GIS capability within each state. And what I mean by that is, in every state that is going through a next gen deployment, you'll have everything from the no GIS support whatsoever, no GIS department whatsoever, all the way up to highly sophisticated, have got it all figured out and are on the kind of the bleeding edge of technology from a GIS standpoint. And the way that next gen is rolling across the country, you have some states that are kind of thinking about it. You have some states that are full on deployed, and everything in between. So in my mind, it kind of parallels. I think that there was the federal funding boost, the grant program that took place about 5 years ago was a big step in the right direction. It kind of allowed some states to leapfrog into more active planning and actual organization and procure some things as well. And obviously the hope is there'll be more legislation in the near future to help facilitate more deployments, more ongoing access to next gen and the rollout. So that's my stance on it, but I'm one of many voices here.
Sure. Melissa, did you have something to offer as well?
Echoing Deb, I would say there's still a lot of, I call it different flavors of next gen deployments going on in the country. It's kind of unfortunate. We have all these great standards documents out there being produced by NENA, the National Emergency Number Association, especially over the last couple of years, and that are really standardizing GIS and how GIS is managed, and 3D now and all these pieces. And I definitely feel that it hasn't quite trickled into all next gen components yet when states are looking to migrate their current E911 systems to next gen. You know, it's not an inexpensive endeavor. Anything from the network side, you know, oftentimes we are updating infrastructure to the building out of the data, especially when the data for a jurisdiction or a state was not ever really intended for the level of accuracy that is required for next generation 911. So I think that is some of the components related to why we do have so many different flavors in the United States of next gen 911. But you know, we've had a similar panel like this with URISA multiple times, and I would say my answer now is different than what it would have been 2-3 years ago. We have more states who are getting on the next gen wagon, who are either in the RFP stage to get to next generation 911, or they are now well on their way to that, which I couldn't have said 2 or 3 years ago. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Some things coming out of the federal government by way of funding, also some pieces of you know, FCC with some of their location requirements coming out is also significantly helping move that needle towards having states and all stakeholders, so anywhere from states and also the carriers kind of getting all on the same page, which really helps everyone move towards next generation 911.
That's great. And Jeff, do you have a feel for where are we as a country in the process of moving toward next gen 911?
Yeah, I would say we're as close as we've ever been. Melissa just said a couple years ago, she does have a different answer now than then, and I would really hardly agree with that. You know, we've got a lot of clients that are in a lot of different places that are doing GIS for public safety, not only for next gen 911, but for other things as well. And we've had more come to us and say, hey, I thought it was ready, and we tried to go ahead and load it up, and I got major problems and I need to figure this out, despite kind of early and often warnings from all the people on this panel, right? And URISA has been great about getting the word out and educating stakeholders as much as possible that there's a lot of GIS data work that needs to happen for it to be ready to handle the burden it's being asked to carry. And there's a lot of forethinkers out there that have gone ahead and gone through some of that effort, and they're going to have a lot easier of a time. But we're kind of approaching that moment that I've always expected to have, where there's this collective like, we better get to work, right? And so I think we are, given the fact that more states are implementing EZNets and are beginning to think about their path into geospatial call routing, where the GIS data is actually used. We're making more progress than ever. And, you know, as consultants and as, you know, software providers that are built to help clients get their data ready and maintained, we're learning a lot too, as they actually get to the implementation phase of geospatial call routing and understanding at an even deeper level all the little peculiarities that we always knew were peculiarities, things like what's a discrepancy agency ID and what does a URI really look like. And we're finally having clients that are to the point where their next-gen core service providers are ready to give them the values that fill into those fields, and we're learning some of the connection points and intricacies that come with that. So I think we're making good progress, but we do definitely need more progress across the country, more funding to support that. And everybody's going to kind of have that wake up moment if they haven't already very soon. So I think we're rolling good.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. We are seeing some questions roll into the chat. I saw Charmaine's question, but it looks like Matt kind of resolved that. Yep. Okay. Boy, I mean, look at all the collaboration of having people in the same virtual meeting space and taking care of stuff together. Thank you for that. Okay, and then Dave asks, in Nebraska, they're a little worried about this impending datum shift. It's of course been pushed back. It was supposed to be the 2022, and now it's not going to be live until at least 2025. But since we do have that lead time on thinking about this, are there any concerns about boundary data sets and how they will be affected by this new datum? Deb, would you like to dig into that one?
Yeah, there was I'll take the angle of the Nina's NG911 GIS data model, because this came up when we were working on what is now the published version, so version 2. It was posed as a question: will this impact the spatial reference required by next generation 911, which is currently the WGS 84, right? And we were talking about it, and then yes, it ended up shifting, and the timing got all pushed out. But in that conversation that we had, there was basically the discussion that WGS 84 is what's mandated by, to give a little background, I should say, all of Next Gen 911, the I3 architecture, all of the infrastructure that guides Next Gen is truly guided by the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force. So it's a global standard, it's global reach on all of this stuff. And they are the ones that mandate WGS 84. Yep, calling up the RFC. There you go, thank you. Super handy. So that is what dictates the spatial reference for Next Gen 911. And the discussion was, you know, if we are going to explore changing that, and if any of the new datum information and the changes that are coming out are going to prompt a discussion or change to that, it would take the processes to escalate it all the way to IETF and look to change the RFC and change the mandate kind of from the top down. So it's not a dead issue by any means. We did postpone it when the datum's changes were also postponed. But for right now, as far as Next Gen and the standards and the requirements for ETLing your data into WGS 84, that's all staying static, unless and until we decide to pursue it all the way up to IETF. So I know, Matt, you might have another perspective on this too.
Yeah, it came up in my neck of the woods a little while ago, and the concern was from localities. Hey, we've worked with all our neighbors, we've agreed to all our boundaries. Are we going to have to redo our boundaries? And the answer is absolutely not. You know, right now in Virginia, most of the data is being maintained in a flavor of NAT 83. And when you upload that to a next gen core service provider, that gets transformed and projected to WGS 84. If you happen to change your local coordinate system or data, that transformation will still happen, because the way the standards are written and the way that core service providers have engineered their software, it all has to transform to WGS 84 to make that work and be standardized. You know, so I'm not too concerned about it. I know that the conversations with different software vendors and core service providers, you know, it's all of our software is going to have to change to be able to update that, be able to handle transformations into those new datums and coordinate systems. And it'll be a little bit challenging. It'll be a little bit tricky, but you know, that's kind of the job of software engineers. You know, make sure that those tools are available.
I'll add to that, Matt. I see this as more of a change management question than anything else, right? And not only will the software have to change, but the data maintainer will have to change some things too. But if you take a change management approach to it, and you're thoughtful about how you're changing it, testing it, and we're staging it and trying things out before we go into some sort of, you know, like a production type setting or mode. If we handle it just like any other type of change that we might make, schema change or any other type of change, I think it's going to be okay, and we don't have to freak out about it.
I like things that I don't have to freak out about. Thank you. Okay, we got some great questions rolling in both the chat and to the Q&A tab. So let's start with Michael's question. Curious about the experts' thoughts on some of the major carriers implementing their own location-based routing, and how does that work with or doesn't work with a state's regional 911 system? As an example, he recently had someone bring this up. Their thought was that we don't even need NG 911 because the carriers are starting to do it for us. What are your thoughts about that?
I can start off on that. It's been something we've been looking at working with for about 2 to 3 years. And in my view, it's kind of an interim approach. You know, if originating service providers are doing their own device-based hybrid GIS routing, it is an improvement upon how E911 works and cell tower sector routing or cell tower routing. But it still is transferring that call or delivering that call to the PSAP through more legacy means. It's not I3, it's not necessarily fiber, it doesn't have the speed piece there. And so for regions and states that really aren't looking at next gen 911 yet, or they're behind the path, or they're a couple years out, it definitely helps out where you're at currently. For those that are on next gen 911, but maybe the originating service providers aren't sending the location information quickly enough in the call for it to geospatially route. This interim device-based hybrid will still probably help you out and get those calls delivered more accurately a little bit quicker. In Virginia right now, right around 50% of the calls that are on the EZNet have that location information delivered quickly enough for it to geospatially route. So about 50% are good, about 50% would still benefit from this. For folks that are completely on the EZNet and they're having most of their calls delivered through the EZNet with geospatial call routing, probably doesn't help out a lot or not as much. And so the degree of help is probably based on where you're at. If it is completely routed and completely delivered based on I3, you're going to get the call quicker than I think you would if you were using any flavor of this interim OSP device-based hybrid. So I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that.
Sure. Melissa, do you have something to share?
Yes, I have lots to weigh on this one. So yes, Matt is 100% correct on this. You know, it kind of depends on where your state is in your next gen journey, I will call it. However, something to consider is in a next generation system, when you're using an EZNet, oftentimes you are working with your neighboring jurisdictions, you're working with your state, your region, what have you. You are working together on I'm just talking about the data. You're making sure that your data is critical error free. You're making sure that there is no overlaps in your responding boundaries with your neighboring PSAPs and that everything is seamless and cohesive. Whereas you have to kind of question the source of routing boundaries or PSAP boundaries that these carriers are providing. Are they looking at some sort of open source data set that maybe hasn't been updated in 3 years? Are they looking at a legacy data set of their wireless call boundaries that kind of sort of align with your current data, but doesn't? It also doesn't allow for more dynamic call routing situations. For example, doing such as things like on the fly routing, or if you suddenly have a situation where you need to alternative route a group of calls from a specific area. So in next gen, you're able to create a boundary on that, assign it specific routing URI piece of information, and the system will automatically start routing your calls like that. You don't need to contact your all the carriers and make sure that they have the most the latest and greatest data sets in place. So I see what the carriers are doing and trying to provide better location using hybrid location, which is fantastic. I'm glad they're looking at providing good data, but I would much rather them focus their efforts on delivering better location to the network within the first 2 or 3 seconds of the call, not waiting 10 seconds to get good location. And this is an interim solution. Like I say, I wish they would focus their efforts elsewhere, because there's just so many better data practices around next gen standards. And again, I question the source of data that these carriers are using, and have actually come across situations, especially when you're in like urban areas that have, you know, really small PSAPs that are not non-contiguous, and just very specific that you know, the carrier will send in a suggested PSAP, but I will admit the systems that I'm aware of for EZNet largely ignore that. And it's not because it's coming from the carrier, it's because they are also questioning what is the data source that the carriers are using to route that call. So I put my faith in you all as GIS people, that you are, again, working with your neighbors, working with your vendors, what have you, working with your state to get good data in the system, and that is what you want to route on, then relying on the carriers to use who knows what source to get that data for routing purposes.
Yeah,
Well,
just
and go ahead, Jeff.
sorry, just to add to that thought, Melissa, I think in some ways in doing so, they're actually going around the people who have the authority and responsibility to deliver the call to the right PSAP. Instead, it's the carrier making that decision, and there's actually statutory authority for the people that are the 911 network to do that activity. So I think, to my mind, that's the biggest concern, or sort of thing that I see about it that isn't great. Is not that technology is not useful or good, that it probably, to everybody's point, has improved some routing in a lot of places, but it's just not their responsibility to do that.
And Michael, I see your question, do you know how they are determining PSAPs to route to? To my knowledge, it is really a mixed bag of how they're getting that information. I think a lot of it, they are looking to some of their E911 sources. I mean, they have wireless call routing boundaries, so they had, some basis of PSAP, but your wireless PSAP, because E911 is based off media type, maybe your wireless boundaries are different than your wireline boundaries. I know sometimes they reach out directly to, like, they do like a quarterly outreach to PSAPs to request that they send in their data. But again, as many of you maybe on the call who have gone through the process of cleaning up not only your data, but your data compared to your neighbors, if you submit data, but your neighboring PSAP also submits data, and there's a large municipality of overlap, I highly doubt that the carrier is going to, they will probably determine who the call should route in that overlap, rather than letting the PSAP comment on it. But it is a mixed bag of the data source, and I've yet to come across a carrier that produces the metadata for their routing boundaries so that PSAPs can find out who that source is.
Well, and I think even building on that sort of concern and mixed bag of data sources is beyond even the call route, is seeing the new classes of service that are coming in with dispatchable location. I don't know how many of you guys are starting to see this, but in a variety of different presentations and just interactions I've had, and it's increasing in the last several months, is this notion of, for those that aren't aware, 911 calls have a class of service. If it's a wireline, wireless, and then within that, the type of technology, wireless phase 1, wireless phase 2. And now there's additional classes of service coming in that are identified as having a civic address conveyed with the wireless call. So just pause for a second and think it's a wireless call. You could be anywhere. And they're trying to figure out a dispatchable address location for wherever you happen to be with the wireless device in your hand. And so they're identifying the class of service, and there's different levels based on the confidence of the accuracy of the address that's being communicated. but it's that same question of what data source is being used to generate that address. It's a huge question mark in my mind, because what people have been saying is it'll come in with that address. That address is wildly, I don't know, misspelled or bad community name or a whole host of other issues that are coming in, but it's an address. And so, you know, obviously there's training at each 911 agency that says you have to look at the class of service and know if that address is trustworthy and believable, as opposed to, say, an alley address that's a wire line in a fixed location that's known and programmed and validated ahead of time. But when you have a wireless location that they may be taking the device location, doing some sort of reverse geocode maybe to an unknown data source, like what is generating that address? And then when it goes into the 911 center, it may or may not work at all with the mapping or the CAD system that they have in place. And then they generate a trouble ticket or a report that goes back to locally authoritative GIS to say, hey, I got this 911 call with this address. It's totally the wrong information. And the GIS person's like, I have nothing to do with that. You know, like it's not locally authoritative GIS that's being used that I can tell to generate that dispatchable address. And to me, it's a rumbling right now that's going to grow into thunder very, very quickly as more of that gets added. But anyway, that's another kind of add-on to that question. So maybe more than you originally asked, Michael, but I feel like it's all tied together, and it all comes back to the trust level of your data sources and where is the data coming from, and all of the complications with that. Go ahead.
I've seen a flurry of inquiries recently, Deb, as well, in the last 6 weeks, of either clients or just people inquiring like, hey, I'm getting told that my GIS data is bad, but it doesn't make sense why it would put this address in.
Right.
And I've, looked into a couple of different specific situations, and each time it was clear that the trouble was with the assumption of what the dispatchable location was.
Yep.
When based on the coordinate, it didn't make sense to
Right.
get real addresses. So I think that is going to become a bigger issue as we move forward.
I'm not usually one to be like, the sky is falling, I'm really worried about this, but this one's got me worried. It's both a like frustration, kind of pulling the hair out, and also just a concern of, is this in fact helping? Yeah. Is it reducing the response time, or is it generating more confusion? Now, the hope is that it's not, it is helping in some fashion. It is, doing something to reduce the response time, but it may be creating then after the emergency, when there's follow-up on trying to correct the data and realizing you have no power potentially to correct the data because you don't know the data source. And even if you found out the data source, it may be a commercial data set. You don't have the right access or authority to make any corrections to it. So these are all problems that are buzzing in my head.
This has real implications for the audience that we're speaking to here.
Yeah,
too.
definitely. Anyone on this
come
call
back to
that
them and say, hey,
Yeah.
is your GIS messed up? And in some cases that's going to be the case, but
right.
And a lot of times GIS folks that aren't in the 911, don't have their head buried deep in the 911 wires, aren't even going to understand how to understand or respond to that.
Yeah, definitely.
I will say one thing that US GIS people actually can do. So your PSAP likely still receives something called like a wireless routing call sheet, probably receives about monthly, or you can actually request it from like Verizon, AT&T. A lot of the major carriers will provide that. And if you need that contact, I can help with that. But there's a column in that, it's a spreadsheet that comes in, and there's a column in that's like the civic address, and it's the civic addresses of the cell towers themselves, which are oftentimes not GIS valid. So it's 137 Muscatine Lane Southeast sector. Well, half of that probably could have been GIS valid, but the second half isn't. And so the carriers rely on the PSAPs to provide valid addresses, or at least tell them when the address on those calling sheets is invalid. So the PSAP actually has some control over at least making the request or providing a much more valid or a address that will validate against your GIS. It's a longer process, but I will say, talk to your PSAP directors, PSAP coordinators, see if you can get your hands on some of those routing sheets and start taking a look at the civic addresses listed on those. Because what I'm seeing oftentimes coming in on the more I3 calls is, we'll come in with the lat long geodetic routing, but the civic address coming in is that tower location that is poorly addressed. And then the kind of the workaround for that then is, again, it's if you reach out to like Verizon and say, hey, this address is wrong, they're going to come back and say, well, this is what the PSAP told us. Now, is it really what the PSAP told them? No, but the PSAP also didn't correct the address that came in on that routing sheet. So that routing sheet does give you some power to dictate, and they're oftentimes really long. Like I said, you can request them, but that is actually something I would suggest you all doing now and taking a look, because with the dispatch location requirements, et cetera, the carriers are just throwing that information in without any sort of validation against your GIS for now. There's some comments in the chat about LVF. I look forward to that day too. We're getting closer. There are some states who have actually put it in their legislation that is soon to be approved, that to operate in their state, carriers actually are required to utilize an LVF, and that is making some carriers stand up and listen. And so I see, probably when we hold this panel, in a year, we're going to actually probably see some LVF, live LVF systems doing their job and better location coming out of it.
Thank you. And related to non-authoritative data that we may or may not be able to update, Matt did post in the chat where you can find contact info for people like Google and Bing in order to resolve some possible routing or address errors. Matt says that information can be found at gps.gov. So for the couple of you who asked about how do we get our Google Maps updated for our community, that sounds like it's a good resource. So thanks, Matt, for putting that into the chat. Let's step back a little bit and talk about professional certifications. We saw the acronym soup that our talented experts have after their names. We have a question. Would obtaining your ENP help you in understanding and preparing for Next Gen 911 as a whole, especially if your experience currently is limited to just the GIS components? Jeff, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, so briefly about the ENP is obviously it's about more than Next Gen 911. It's about everything in the PSAP. And so there are a lot of questions about technical things like radios. I was trying to say rodeo, but I meant to say radios. There's operational considerations as well. They were the most difficult questions on the exam for me, was questions about fair labor standards. What happens if you have a dispatcher that turns up pregnant? Are the implications of that on your HR concerns? And how do you schedule a 24/7 operation with enough staff members? So there's a lot of questions on the ENP that really have nothing to do with Next Gen 911, but Next Gen 911 is a growing segment of that. But that said, I would certainly say that if you want to learn, because the value of the ENP for me personally was in the preparation I made to take the test and the things that I learned about those topics that I would have never considered in preparation for it. I would say reach out to a prep group. There's a lot of prep groups out there. I know Florida Nina has a good one. Texas Nina has a really good one. MCP is a consulting firm in the industry. They have Louisa Lake host one, and where she happens to be a Nina instructor, as are myself and Deb, and she recently was talking about in one of our meetings about how how much feedback she gets about how many people kind of connect their acquiring of the credential, but especially the knowledge to get the credential to that work group. So I would say reach out to one of those work groups. You'll learn a lot. And if you've got the experience in the PSAP environment or serving the PSAP environment, even though it's not your employer, you can certainly take the test and qualify for it. So I think it's a good credential to have.
And I would just add to say that I do find it highly valuable. It was very much a learning experience. It's been 12 years or so since I took the test. And I think they have added more next gen content throughout the years. I will say that it's not necessarily something that will dive really deep in the weeds on next gen and GIS. But that's not necessarily. So the question I think might have asked, will it give you that true full next gen understanding? Not necessarily, but it's so beneficial for all 911 understanding and the operation of the PSAP, like you said, Jeff, and all the different things that go into the job that is 911 telecommunicators. So definitely beneficial, but I don't expect necessarily to come away as a next gen expert. It's going to be more broad 911 topics and all very beneficial.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And another question here, how do you communicate the need of GIS-based addressing to stakeholder groups such as elected leaders? Any tips or pointers for communicating why GIS is important to someone who has been elected to serve?
So
Melissa
URISA,
and then Jeff.
yeah, URISA has some great resources actually. There's a one pager that was produced, was it earlier this year, maybe late last year, that has some like highlighting talking points that's available on the URISA website. I think maybe we're taking a look at that.
Matt is furiously navigating to it.
I know. I know. And I think that is highly useful when you're talking to your local leaders, presenting not only this kind of one pager, but also relaying the benefits. There's lots of industry stories on the advantages of next gen and good addressing practices and saving lives, et cetera, et cetera. So I would definitely look at kind of what Matt is showing you right now, and take those talking points to discuss with your local leaders.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, the best thing you can do when talking to really non-GIS people in general, but especially to the people that hold the purse strings and make political decisions, is don't talk about databases and features and points, lines, and polygons. Instead, talk about the benefits that the system brings. And the more sort of cross-departmental you can make the picture paint, the more value it'll have to them. And connecting public safety to it is a great value to them, because you can demonstrate that response times are reduced, that lives are saved because good GIS data was in place. I hand out when I go to conferences, I hand out stickers that say GIS data saves lives. And I think that's the message you want to send, is that GIS data saves lives and it's worth the investment.
Yeah.
And good visibility into where their voters are.
Yeah.
Right.
And usually, as you said, if you can promote the use of the data that's built as a cross-departmental, leverage the return on investment across multiple departments, that has generally had a positive impact too on helping guide those discussions. Because anytime you can have a cost sharing mechanism and then multiple departments benefit from a single effort, you'll gain more ground and you'll get some interest that way as well. So
excellent. Good discussion. Thank you. How about this one? How do you reconcile the NINA data model with the National Address Database? How do you support both of these data models along with your local Esri-based geocoding, especially within ArcGIS Pro? Any takers to talk about maybe ETL workflows that can help you change the way you're maintaining data and still be in compliance with other data models where needed?
I would just, as an initial answer to this, say that, you know, the NINA GIS data model is now on its third version. It's a standard that was published in 2018, version 2 last year, and now we're actively engaged in building version 3 and expanding, and it's going to keep going, right? But at its core, it's not that every version is a re-architecture. It's usually you know, you don't want to change. Nobody likes to change schemas, and that's not the point of the data model, is to change that schema every time. It's more to refine it. If there's a true need, a new technology, a new component of next gen that requires another field or another layer, yes, definitely that would add into it. But for the most part, it's looking at that as kind of the core of your location validation. And when you look at the data models that you use locally, oftentimes, if you're already supporting 911 systems, there's a whole lot of overlap. And so it just becomes about, you know, the ETL functions, extract, transform, and load from your local schema and into the data model. And then looking at comparing that as well to the national address database, and where are the components similar or different, and just building the routines to translate amongst them. But there is a lot of overlap between them. So, I mean, it's, and then as far as the local geocoding, I guess I'm not sure about supporting it with Esri-based geocoding. We're getting into a lot of different kind of tentacles with the question, but again, all location validation and geocoding generally operates off the same core fields of house number and street name elements. And with NextGen, there's an added component of legacy. You need to match on legacy components, and then that gets converted into NextGen structure for how location is translated. But again, at the core, in my opinion, at least, I think there's a lot of solid fields at the core that translate to all of these different models, and building some ETL routines usually is what you know lets you communicate amongst all of them. Others may have more to add to it or different opinions on that. Nope.
Nope. Nope. That's
shaking. No. Okay.
Yeah,
Maybe that was complete.
I'll jump in there. You know, I think the key to that is that working in local government, your address data model, your address structure is based on your functional needs. There's some folks I work with here in Virginia where they ETL and load their addresses into 9 different systems. And their right schema, their right system is the one that enables them to support them to not break how they're using GIS addresses and all those other 9 systems. You know, so from that perspective, and the time I spent in local government, you know, I would think of the data model or the national address database or this thing or that thing as one thing to rule them all. I'd really look at it as understanding that there are different schemas, there are different formats, and you may need to load your data into that format or get your data into that format to meet a purpose. But it's really not normative in terms of requiring you to change how you're using your existing addresses and make them look like anything else. You know, you have your own needs, you know, usually based on choices that your organization has already made.
okay. Great. Thank you for that. Last question that I see, so be sure to send your remaining thoughts into the Q&A or the chat. So this question says, as a data aggregator, what kind of advice or considerations should take place when you're engaging with stakeholders? For example, what would you include from a needs requirements perspective?
So I'll jump in for this one. Some advice I would give is to put yourself in their perspective, and it's very much what's in it for them. You obviously have your needs for good data, for engagement, but your needs are probably different than their needs. So it's a little bit putting yourself in their shoes, and as described, for answer a previous question, it can be used to know where their taxpayers are. I know several states that are using the data for state education services and DOTs, but obviously, DOT is going to have different needs of data than 911, but good roads data benefits both departments. So just that's my recommendation, is try to think what they need and how your needs might align.
I think
Good
just to
advice.
extend that thought, Melissa, the way that you might do that is if you're at a regional level and you're aggregating multiple cities, there may be many sort of ETLs like we talked about with the NAD database too, right? That need to happen. You shouldn't expect them to do those. Instead, you should do the flexing and support that to the extent possible as well, which always isn't easier, or is easier said than done, I should say. But I think you hit the right stroke there, Melissa, is that you have to take what they can give you and do what you can to make it fit the format you need it in.
I think something else to keep in mind, if you're a data aggregator and you're working with neighboring jurisdictions or localities, is that their data may not line up, their data may not agree. That kind of makes your job working with them, enabling them to resolve what differences or lack of agreement there is. And from the next gen 911 perspective, I'd encourage you not to try to focus on fixing legal administrative boundaries. That can take years. Or trying to make the spaghetti of overlapping parcel polygons line up. That's more of a tax revenue issue. It's important, but it's a different issue. But focusing on the next gen 911, what boundaries must agree for next generation 911? Your provisioning boundary, your PSAP polygons, your LawFire EMS, your roads. Where are they going to meet on a provisioning boundary? Where are you going to have a snap point between those? And some of the most rewarding conversations that I've had in my career have been, bringing people together and talk about those issues and try to figure out that agreement. And it's really great when it's focused on understanding and the need for 911, rather than, well, why are we using that data? Why aren't we using my data? My data is right. You want to try to the best extent possible, avoid those conversations, because as a data aggregator, you can't win them, and you don't want to be put in a position where you're deciding. And so wearing that facilitator hat is, I think, a really important skill and a really important perspective to take.
Yeah, and I would say one last thought to add to that is that I've found a lot of success when hosting those conversations or facilitating those conversations to just talk about the provisioning boundary and the PSAP boundary and all these boundaries as functional boundaries. They have to work within the 911 system. You have to find a way to reconcile differences that, legality is important when you're looking at tax revenue and you're looking at all these different things, but you need it to work. It has to be a functional boundary. And so using that angle or that frame of mind in the conversation has helped maybe unlock some mindsets in those meetings. Not all the time, but it's something that has worked for me in the past.
Sounds good. We do have two quick questions from earlier in the chat. Jessica had asked, what are some places that are still at basic 911 level of service that are still moving toward next gen? And I can share that Alaska is definitely one of those states that is very much a mixture of basic 911 and enhanced 911. And we're just barely starting to get folks to use the words next gen 911. And I'm sure there are others out there as well.
I think there are portions of Nevada I remember hearing, and that could have changed because this is older information. I will say I don't have a current up-to-date map in my mind of all the status of all 911 across the country, but I have heard there's some struggles in more remote parts of Nevada and some other states that are, yeah, they're
Rural.
much more rare that true. And when you say basic 911, that's basic is purely like a rollover where you dial 911 and it just rolls over to a 10-digit number, and there's no location and there's no, selective routing. There's no intelligence behind it whatsoever. And that does still exist in some small pockets across the country, but most have at least gotten to an enhanced 911 stage with selective routers. Not everywhere, as you said, but a lot of places, most places have.
Yep. And then Patrick had asked, how is the data model handling the relational model? What will this be the long-term way of submitting data, or will the long-term support be both flat and relational?
Patrick knows my hot buttons.
Oh.
I'll say one thing. And so the data model, as I said before, it's in version 3 right now. I'm one of 3 co-chairs on that work group through Nina. That's making sure all this stuff we stick to our charter and we don't go too far beyond it. And one of the things is, yes, in the actual I3 architecture standard, there's been a relational model at the end of it called Appendix B that has guided a lot of data model elements, but the data model is a flat file structure. So in version 3, one of the things we're doing is taking Appendix B, it's getting stripped out of I3, it's coming over to the data model, and we're reconciling it between the flat file and the relational versions. And there is a whole host of passionate opinions about relational versus flat file that I don't want to get into. We will quickly run out of time, but I will just say that Appendix B is getting dropped into the data model as an optional alternative structure, and it will be up to core service providers to determine if they're going to architect their solutions to fit one or the other. But one of the things we're also looking at is making sure that programmatically the 2 models can be easily translated between them, so that there's nothing in one that's not in the other, or that there will be ways to design programmatic ways to translate from relational to flat and vice versa. So it sounds very like utopian future, but seriously, that's what the goal is. That's part of the version 3 work that we're doing right now.
All right, hot
Anyone else want to
buttons.
add?
Hot buttons indeed, and
Yes.
that really goes to what we started off with, in terms of, we are a community of GIS professionals. I like to thank everybody that's attended today, and especially the panelists. We're all working in next gen, and there's so many different ways and layers and perspectives and interactions. It's really the passion I think we collectively have for wanting to help everybody succeed with this, and the impact and the difference that it means. I've been told by somebody in the industry that when a call is delivered through I3 Next Generation 911 as optimally as it can, it's getting to the right PSAP with better location information 10 to 15 seconds faster than it would have in a legacy 911 environment. And that's kind of amazing to think about, that it's not only getting there quicker, it's getting there with the better information, it's getting to the right place. So a couple things in terms of wrap up. Number one, we are recording this. It'll be up on the URISA YouTube channel shortly, probably in the next couple days. Operational definition is shortly. Number two, if you like these sorts of conversations and want to get involved, really the best way to do it is to join us on the URISA Next Generation 911 Task Force. I know after our panel discussion last week, we're thinking about setting up more of a designated chat just about our addressing struggles and frustrations that many of us have. But one of the great things about URISA is that if there isn't a community there of like-minded folks, it's easy to make one and find that support. Also pay attention to many of the numerous activities, in-person events, virtual events, publications, other webinars that are coming out. And finally, if you have your passion, or if you're just passionate about getting some folks up here on the hot seat and answering the really tough questions that you all come up with, let us know. your thoughts, your opinions help us guide with content. We definitely have fun doing this. But if you have your own thing that you're passionate about, please reach out to URISA and work with the team there to figure out how you can share that passion and that experience with the broader community. So with that, thank you all, panelists and audience, for attending and making this a really exciting hour. And we'll look forward with connecting with you all in person or virtually, synchronously or asynchronously, somewhere down the road. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.